Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's GP Strategies session, Gamification, a Practical Approach to Increase Engagement and Problem-Solving Skills. My name is Nick Morris, and I will be your host for today's event. Before we get started, I want to cover a few small housekeeping items. First, everyone's phone lines have been placed in listen-only mode to eliminate any possible disruptions. And because we have a lot of great content to cover in only half an hour today, if you have a question during either presentation, we ask you to submit that through the Q&A module found in the right-hand panel of WebEx, and we will address them at the end of the session during the question and answer portion. If we run short on any time, Sherry and Ken will personally address questions in a follow-up blog post. We encourage you to share the information you received today with your colleagues and networks via social media. We will also be tweeting live during today's session. Please be sure to include the hashtag GPWebinar or the handle @GPCore so we're able to follow your contribution to the conversation. Finally, the slides and recording of this event will be emailed to you within 48 hours, and as always, they will be available with all of our other great presentations on our webinar recordings page at gpstrategies.com. Now I'd like to introduce today for you our first presenter, Sherry Weppel. Sherry is the Director of Training and E-Learning Development at GP Strategies. She has over 15 years of experience designing, developing, and delivering interactive computer-based and web-based learning modules. Her role is to drive innovative ISD techniques into the process and provide valuable input on the state of learning and best in-class practices. Sherry has an MS in Learning Sciences and Technology with a focus in gaming for instruction at Lehigh University. She has also earned an MS in Instructional Design and Development from Lehigh University and a BS in Art Education from Kutztown University. With that, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Sherry.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Nick. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We're going to start off with a quick poll. We'd just love to be able to find out where you're at from a gaming perspective. So when you think about gaming and we look at the boxes on the screen, which of these fits you most? You know, are you the type of person who, if you're not at work, you're on that Xbox, you're on the Wii, you're on the PlayStation, whatever the latest and greatest gaming system is? Are you more of the person who, when you have friends come over for game night, you know you're playing games online or you're playing board games? Are you the type of person who maybe you have, a couple of games installed on your smartphone, you play them every once in a while, like when you're sitting on the tarmac waiting for the airplane to take off? Or are you not into games of any kind? Are you more outdoorsy, or do you do other things other than playing games? So you'll see that the polling question came up. If you can select the one that most applies to you, it would be really helpful for us to get a perspective of what type of individual you are and how you relate to gaming. So it's important for us to think about these kinds of things and about how we can motivate our learners, and that's a lot about what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to give everybody another minute or two, and then I'm going to ask Nick to close the poll for us so that we can check out the results. So Nick, if you could close the poll. And while we do that, what I want to talk about is the wave of the future, and I want to tell you a little story. A few months back, I was actually at a family engagement, and as with every family engagement, the adults are all standing in the kitchen. Why we have other rooms in our house, I don't know, because we all managed to crowd around that table in the kitchen. And we're all talking, and we suddenly notice that the children are nowhere to be found. We find all the kids, they're all sitting in the living room, and this is what we're looking at. We're looking at my
You gotta call in, Denise.
We're looking at my nieces and nephews who are, anywhere from 3 years old to 8 years old, 9 years old, and they're all staring at their cell phones. They're staring at iPods, iPod Touches, iPads, and they're all playing these games. And so at first we were a little bit concerned, and then it turned out that they were all playing a game together in some sort of a virtual world. So what we need to consider is that the wave of the future is that these are going to be the people who we are training one day. So one day, and that one day is now, we're training a population of individuals who are staring at their smartphones. They're the individuals who play games. That's the type of population that we're training. That's what they do when they're outside of work. So how does that change how we need to work with them? So we're now going to take a look at another little poll. So if you can launch the second poll. Now we want to think about your team. So when we think about your team, what is your team like, or what is the population that you're looking to train? So we have the same 4 criteria, but start to think less about how you are personally and start thinking about the people in your organization that you're looking to train. One of the biggest challenges is that we all have our own personal bias. You know, we all like certain things. You know, we may be visual learners, we may be kinesthetic learners, we may be auditory learners, and oftentimes those personal preferences will override how we develop training for an organization. And so it's important for us to put ourselves in their shoes as to what type of training that they would like. Today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about gamification from a little bit of a different perspective. So gamification traditionally, when a lot of people are talking about it in articles and in journals, in webinars like this, they're talking about gamification from an online standpoint. So usually there's some sort of a system, there's badging that's involved, typically a complex computer-based type of an engagement. What we want to talk about is the fact that gamification does not have to be something that's that complex, and that gamification is really applying the principles of games to the design of the instruction that we're looking to do. So if we can now close out that second poll, we're going to start to get into the meat of the presentation. So as we talk about a practical approach to gaming, so if you have the means and the time to be able to do an online game and leaderboards and badging and a complex system, then by all means, if that's what your organization needs and you have the ability to do that, then that might be a great solution for you. But there's other organizations that maybe there's less resources available, maybe there's less time available, maybe it's just a different type of population, maybe there's a board game type population, that we want to consider some other options and that we don't have to just dismiss gaming altogether. When we think about the methodology of gaming, or what I had just said about it's about the design, it's how we apply gaming principles to the design of what we're doing, it really comes down to 4 different concepts. It comes down to the story that you're trying to tell. It comes down to the strategy that you're looking for learners to employ. It comes down to providing them with some sort of a score or some means of assessment or assessing themselves and how they're doing. And it comes down to giving them the support that they need to be successful. So as we talk about our case study a little bit later on today, I want you to think about these 4 principles and how you can see these 4 principles applied in the planning and scheduling game that we're going to discuss in a bit. The options for gaming are truly endless. If you think about gaming from the broadest term or the broadest sense of the word, there are games that can be done in the form of role plays. There are games that can be done in the form of skills challenges. There's games that can be listening games where you have someone say something and you have to listen to that and know how to respond, or try and pick up a certain number of key words as you're listening to a statement being given. Games can be mini games that are used in the form of assessments. They can be classroom games. You can use badging. They can be online. And then we also have this big orange box, which is the box we're going to open up a little bit later. So when we think about badging, I know the badging of today is a very complex system of some sort of a mobile device, but badging really goes back to Boy and Girl Scouts. Badging could be something as simple as if you have an employee population that wears uniforms, having a badge or a pin that they put on their uniform. It could be magnets or stickers that they could put on the side of their work trucks. It could be icons that appear on business cards, or pens or plaques are more traditional means of providing that kind of that stamp of approval that you've completed something or you've achieved a certain level. It could be a classroom game. So in this example, this was made in something as simple as PowerPoint, but it took it from having a simple review of this is information, this is what we covered yesterday, this is what we're covering today, and put it into a game format. It could be an online game, but it doesn't have to be a complex online game. We actually did a presentation about this a couple of months ago. So it's talking about using those tools and techniques that you would find in a game and employing those principles in something that's not very complex. You can also do a mini game, which allows you to do a form of an assessment with giving them hints or clues and a timer that they have to complete something in a certain period of time. But what we want to talk about today is we want to talk about gaming outside of the box. So we want to talk about some of the non-traditional methods that we can use for gaming that can really make a benefit in what might be a more difficult part of the population to train. To do that, we're going to have Ken Arthur join us. Ken Arthur joined GP in 1991. He leads the GP Maintenance and Reliability Performance Improvement Group at a GP's Tampa office. Currently, he manages a number of projects to help clients improve total productive maintenance, or TPM, operator care programs, 5S, and maintenance planning and scheduling. He has designed, developed, and implemented a wide variety of learning games for clients in a number of industries. He also won the CSPD WOW Award for the shutdown delivery game at Dofasco Steel in Hamilton, Ontario, which has now been an integral part of that steel mill's curriculum for 10 years. He has also created the GP's highly successful series of maintenance efficiency games, such as our outage game and our new planning and scheduling game. And with that, I will turn the presentation over to Ken.
Planning and scheduling, and it is a particular game that we've developed and had a lot of success with, and I wanted to share it with you. The need for this type of a game, if you can imagine, most of the people that do a lot of maintenance planning and scheduling within their organizations, these are large manufacturers and production facilities that have a sizable workforce both in the production and in the operations associates, but also in the maintenance staff. And these are the skilled tradesmen who work on all the industrial equipment, the mechanics, the electricians, the electronics technicians, pipe fitters, welders, the hydraulics guys. All of these types of people in a big, large facility that needs planning and scheduling training, what they're trying to do is implement best practices and a systematic approach that is going to have to involve the interaction between so many different roles throughout the organization. And usually in these types of things, the impact that an individual has on an action that they do or do not do, they may not even feel the impact of this due to just space and time and the chain of cascading consequences. So if you're trying to implement planning and scheduling, and this was our challenge here, is to get away from just boring classroom training of these best practice concepts on a PowerPoint and try to involve some sort of a way that they can have hands-on after they've learned the best practices, and how can they actually apply it in the classroom and have them, because hands-on, we all know, is just the most effective form of training. So we developed this type of a game, and we just want to just quickly tell you how it goes, and maybe this will provoke some thought in some of you of how you can use these principles and apply this gaming technique to any number of training applications that you have going on out there. So this one is around planning and scheduling, and it's hands-on, and if you see the board, you'll see that there are little players on there, little construction workers, and there's dice, and you'll roll the dice and you'll move your mechanics from one part of the game board to another as your work order dictates. It replicates in a simple way the breadth and depth of a large industrial maintenance organizations when you have maintenance and you have production and you have different workers and their work needs to be planned and scheduled so that they can be very efficient and have high wrench time. Because if they do that, they can harvest all those man hours that they had spent on maintenance waste and losses of looking for parts and having the wrong parts and the wrong work lined up and not having things coordinated between maintenance and production and from different groups. So we developed this type of a game where the players are put in charge of teams of mechanics, electricians, operators, contractors, and they have work orders, and they have parts, and they have all the real-world issues that they have, because most of these maintenance organizations, they have a large backlog that they're trying to work down. They probably have less people than they've had in times past. They're dealing with crises of not finding skilled replacements for some of their older maintenance workforce that is on the verge of retiring. And so these are all problems that they're dealing with when it comes to trying to get the maximum amount of maintenance work done within a period of time. It could be an outage or it could be weekly work planning and scheduling. So this game it accompanies training that they're given. And sometimes this game is played on day 1 of the training or on days 2 and 3 of the training. Sometimes it's all done at one time on one big day. the goal of the game is the goal of planning and scheduling in a nutshell, and that is to get more work safely done within the period of time that you're given. It could be an outage or it could be each week. And the way you get more work safely done is through applying these world-class planning and scheduling principles and practices. And a lot of people would need to attend this, obviously. The people in production, because they write work orders and they have to coordinate with the maintenance personnel to get their equipment worked on and get the preventive maintenance done, et cetera. And so, of course, production needs to be involved, people in the parts organization, supervisors, planners, the craftsmen, because the craftsmen, you know, we're relying on them in the planning and scheduling process when they're given a work order and they're going to go and repair or do preventive maintenance on a piece of critical equipment. Well, you know, oftentimes they have a duty to turn that work order back in with valuable information that the planning and scheduling group needs to improve. And so the craftsmen, of course, they play a major role in this as well. And so they're ideal candidates for this. But what we had to do is we had to think through what are the things that we want them to learn and what are the behavioral changes we're going to want them to learn as a result of the training, what are the different roles and responsibilities and have an understanding of the roles that others play in the system. And how to be in a team-based environment for planning and scheduling. So when we customized it, you know, we've done it where we've had to customize the game board because a steel mill will have a different scenario than an offshore oil platform. And different groups have different roles and responsibilities and work orders and their maintenance priority system governed by their computerized maintenance management system. And they have different standards. And so we've had a lot of fun designing these games to fit the needs of our clients. And as you can see, there's the award that we won with DeFasco years ago. But just to give you an idea of how this is applied to a refinery, and so you can see they had, theirs in particular, they had pipe fitters. So we had to have a job for the pipe fitters and their work orders, and also for the electricians and for the mechanics and the operators. And the operators actually ran the plant that you can see on the left-hand side in the green and the transparent towers there. There's a submersible pump that pumps water up into there through these valves and the piping system. And the operators run this plant, and they also do their inspections throughout the facility that they normally do in their jobs. And also maintenance is going around to the different areas that you can see here, from those horizontal storage tanks to those towers over there. And they're having to get their work done. So the game is a perfect replication of what they're going through on a daily basis. But what it allows them to do is to implement these best practices that they've learned in the training. And they have to have the meetings that they have, those huddles that they get together in the morning and the afternoon, and they actually do it on their game boards. And they actually have to build these piping runs behind you and ship those motors and pumps around when they're working on jobs, and they have to go to the control room in this particular example and interface with production and operations when they needed permits to work on various equipment, that sort of thing. So this is just one example, but what it allows them to do is to put into practice, and all of the people, they're in charge of these groups of people, and they all play different roles. And they're all different. You can see you can distinguish when you're moving because you've probably got 4 or 5 mechanics on your game board, and you can distinguish the mechanics from the electricians by the way they're color coded. But you put into practice planning and scheduling principles and practices through a series of weeks. And so the first week is going to be pretty rough because you're trying to simulate a maintenance planning and scheduling environment that's not all that great. Perhaps where there's some waste and losses, the work orders aren't planned that good, maybe there's parts problems. But as the weeks go by, each team, because we break this into 3 different teams of people that are competing against each other with the same setup, with that crane up there that moves and raises and lowers loads when they've got to ship equipment around the game board. And so you've got 3 teams of people who are doing the same task. They have the same backlog, same work order, same parts, same constraints. And And as they're going, you know, if they're doing a good job on their PM inspections, they're identifying defects and problems, and we're using the work request system and using these world-class planning and scheduling principles and practices, because if they do, then they're going to get more work done in their backlog, and they'll be a clear winner at the end of the day, and they get prizes, and people have the best time. They're playing with these toys. They are just the part of the game, you know, they might land on a game square that says Pictionary, and now they've got to get up in front of their buddies. I just saw this last week, and they have to get up, and here's these old steel mill guys, and they're doing Pictionary, trying to get people to understand a term that's related to planning and scheduling, let's say. And they just, they're really having a good time, but they actually learn. And it helps them when companies use these type of games. If you've got some sort of best practice training that you're doing around there, and it may not have nothing to do with planning and scheduling. It could have to do with quality improvement or TPM or customer service. But anytime you're trying to incorporate some best practice awareness training sometimes, and you've got that limited time on an agenda, it's always great to try to build in one of these types of learning games that people can have hands-on, because they learn, they're fun, and they really get people committed to it, and it allows them to actually see the results of what you're training them on, and them to feel the power of it firsthand. And so we've always found them to be very, very, very good training tools and performance improvement tools. And so this was just one way that we applied this to replicate a certain environment, and you can do this for all kinds of applications. Before we take some questions and answers here at the end, I'm going to just turn it over to Sherry again, just to kind of put a wrap on this subject matter.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Ken, for sharing that. It's such an excellent example of how gaming can be something that's out of the box. You know, it doesn't have to be something behind the computer screen. It doesn't have to be something that's, you know, wild and crazy or, you know, takes forever. It could be something as simple as having, you know, some realistic scenarios to work through. You know, I've watched people play this game, and they always fight over who gets to use the crane. But it really helps them put a lot of these practices and things that we've talked about to real practice and to real use. So as we start to think about this methodology of gaming, it really does come down to there's a story. You know, there's a story of this is the plant that you're operating in. Here are the things that you need to do during the day. You know, here are the actions that you need to take, and how are you going to do things? What are you going to do? You know, there are strategies to employ. So those are the planning and scheduling practices that they've been taught. And how are they going to employ those practices to be successful? You know, they're getting their reports, and their reports or their scores are coming in a realistic manner. You know, from a support perspective, we have our subject matter experts are there to support them throughout this process as they play the game. So this is just one example, and it's always nice to talk in general terms about gaming, but for me, it's always nice when we can bring to the table an example of how this could be applied. And remember that while we've done this in steel mills and we've done this in refineries, remember that this applies to, you know, any kind of facility. So this could be in a pharmaceutical company, the manufacturing facility. You know, this could be in any type of industry where there's something that's manufactured or produced. So it's something to keep in mind that a game can be something that isn't electronic at all. You know, sometimes we can go back to the days of using, you know, game pieces and game boards and dice and have a really measurable impact. With that, I will turn it back over to Nick.
Okay, thank you, Sherry and Ken, for the great presentations. So we have a few minutes left, and so if you have any questions, we've already had some questions come in, but make sure that you submit them in the Q&A module so that they can either be answered within the next couple minutes, or if not, within a follow-up blog post that will follow. So without any further ado, I'll ask a question that came through. I think this one would probably be best answered by Sherry. And the question is, how can gamification work for learners that don't regularly use games?
That's a really great question. So it comes down to what are those principles of gamification that are really successful. So it's really, you know, it may not be someone who has that competitive streak. You know, that's a lot of where people stray away from games, as if they're not the competitive type. But gamification can really work with just giving someone something to achieve to. So whether it's the completion of a curriculum gets you a certain status or a certain title, whether you go from a diamond class to a ruby class to an emerald class if you're working in a gem industry, or whether you get bronze, silver, or gold status or something like that. It gives you something to aspire to and to work to, and it gives you something measurable to react to. I mean, if you think about gamification, we do this in our companies all the time. You get a plaque and maybe you get a pen when you get to 5 years, and there's a sense of pride as you're sitting in a meeting holding your pen knowing, hey, you know what, I got this for being here and for being a part of this great organization for the past 5 years. So gamification can be employing a lot of those principles. Even if you don't like games, training is so much more effective when it's tied around a story or a theme or something realistic that can grab the learner's attention. One other question that we do have is, can we be provided with a copy of this presentation? Absolutely. What's going to happen is within the next 24 to 48 hours, we're actually going to have this session recorded. There'll be a follow-up blog post with answers to your questions and some more information. And with that, you actually do get a copy of the presentation as well. We do have another question that comes in that says, has this model been used in a retail application? So heavy truck repair facility in a very high traffic location. I can absolutely see in a really short amount of time how this could be applicable to that. Ken, I don't know if you've done anything within that industry. I know you've created a lot of custom games. I don't know if Ken's not muted.
Right. As far as I know, none of ours have had to do with a retail application at this point, but there have been a lot that had to do with a truck repair facility, like within steel mills and different places that we have. They have a truck repair department, and they're run through the ringer for all the mobile equipment that they're responsible for, and it's very similar principles. So.
Yeah, so I mean that's very similar to when we had this planning and scheduling game in the beginning. I remember last time I visited Ken, we were looking at the one that relates to a steel mill, and he was actually in the middle of building the one that relates to a refinery. So a lot of what we have in this game could absolutely be customized to relate to more of that retail application in the heavy industry. One of the other questions that we have is, what are some of the best ways of getting gamification involved in an organization? One of the challenges are if you're one of these early adopters who's on this call, you're thinking about gamification, and maybe you're looking across your organization and going, my organization isn't ready for this yet. We're a very traditional organization. We're very straightforward from a training perspective. How do I get people engaged to start thinking about gaming? And really the best recommendation that we have for that is to do things a little bit at a time. Instead of kind of going full tilt into getting gamification in your environment, start by just adding a simple theme to some of your trainings. Start by adding, one of those mini games like we talked about from a classroom-based perspective. Start out small and start out integrating it bit by bit in your training solution, and then you can start to see what kind of impact you have in your organization. And even a little tiny game or even a little tiny theme or a story involved in your training is going to make a huge benefit. So that's just another recommendation that we have. That being said, it does look like we're out of time. I'm going to turn it back over to Nick for some closing thoughts.
Okay. I think we have time for one more question. I just want to get into one more.
Okay. I did just see one more. So one of the other questions. Go ahead.
This question came in just now. How does someone acquire the knowledge and skills to develop game strategies other than the one demonstrated by Ken? So beyond board games. So I guess that would be kind of your territory. Sherry, if you want to take that.
So it really comes down to creativity. And I don't know that you can necessarily be taught creativity, but I do think that when we lay out these 4 strategies of story, strategy, score, and support, I think it's something that people can relate to. So we're often working with subject matter experts and clients who want to get involved with a game, but aren't really sure how. And what they'll typically do is they'll typically give us the source content that they're looking to convey, and we'll start to ask them questions around why. What are you trying to do? What are you trying to get across? Tell me a situation in which this mattered or this information was useful. and that helps to build your story. And as you start to do that, lean on games that you may have used in the past, so games like Monopoly, games like Pac-Man, any kind of game that you may have done in the past, and then you start to build your strategy around it, because the best games aren't games that are just fun. They're games like what Ken showed us, where it's not only a story, it's not only a strategy that people are employing, but it very easily connects to their real life. So it's something that they can easily apply to their day-to-day job, but have fun while they're doing it.
All right, thank you, Sherry and Ken. We actually got an influx of questions towards the end here, but we are out of time. So everyone be prepared and expect a follow-up blog post to be sent out later on, as well as the recording of the webinar and the slides to the presentation. So all the questions that we weren't able to answer will be addressed in that blog post. And also, look forward to our next webinar. It's a 20-minute webinar on mobile strategy, how to reach your learners. And that's Thursday, March 19th, and that would be presented by Sherry Wessel. So that's all the time we have today. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. And for GP Strategies, I'm Nick Morris, and everyone have a great day.